Sam, thank you so much for joining us today. I'd love to jump in. Tell us, who are you? Where are you from? Where are you based now?
God, what a big question. My name is Samantha. I am from Sydney originally, and in about 2000 and oh my gosh, what year was it? About 12, we moved to Hong Kong. And so we'd kind of made this conscious decision with my husband, or not actual husband at the time, but now, that we wanted to explore and see more of the world and discover different cultures. And we decided that he was in finance, and so it made sense that either Hong Kong or Singapore were ideal. And so we sat around a dinner table with some friends and we just declared we're going to move to Hong Kong. And they were like, oh, and I was like, well, not yet, but it's going to come. The job's going to come. And then he got a call from a recruiter saying there's a job available in Hong Kong. Would you be interested? And so it was a very quick yes. So we moved to Hong Kong and it was amazing. But, quite quickly after I got there, I realized if I didn't find something to do, I was going to be really bored. And so I launched a company, an outpost of an Australian company called Successful Resumes in Hong Kong. We stayed in Hong Kong until after my son was born. And then I realized that Hong Kong was not great for pushing around a pram. And so I'd said one day, okay, it's time to make the next move. Let's go to Singapore. And so not long after that, Adrian got a tap on the shoulder and said, there's a role in Singapore. Are you interested? Like, yes, quick decision to move. When I got here, the situation around setting up a company and working is quite different to Hong Kong. There's a lot less flexibility. And so for a long time, I just managed my Hong Kong company from Singapore and worked only with Hong Kong clients and was quite separate from it. But after a while, I kind of started feeling like I was lacking a bit of purpose, because it's hard to manage a company from offshore. You don't have the same level of connection with your clients and can't meet face to face, and there's a whole range of things, hard to grow the business. And so it took me a while and a few conversations, but then eventually I decided to bite the bullet and set up in Singapore as well, which means going through the process of an LLC. What I did do though is set up a company that has two arms here. So I'm still focused on my core work, which is career coaching and executive resume writing. But I also set up a design business, and so we sell products as well, mainly based around Singapore. At the same time as that, I'm the CEO of an organization in Australia called Successful Resumes, and so we've got 30 offices there and a few in other countries. So I'm kind of juggling this, complex but super interesting work portfolio career is what I'd like to call it.
So interesting. So tell me, what year were we when we moved from Hong Kong to Singapore?
That must have been 2015 or 16.
Yeah, got you. So talk me through what was first, like, I don't know, say 3 months like in Hong Kong when you left Sydney and left work yourself and things. What was it like those first few months in Hong Kong?
It was amazing. I mean, we moved just the two of us, but I feel like we moved with all of our family and friends, because we just had this revolving door of visitors. And so I felt like a tourist in the city for a long time, showing people around, and, we were doing some traveling, which was lots of fun. But just, going from Sydney, where everything is shut at 6 p.m. and where you can kind of see the dust balls going down the street at 7, to Hong Kong, which feels like it never sleeps. There's food everywhere, there's a vibrancy everywhere. It's just, and the smells and the colors and all the lights. It was really fantastic. It was a fabulous city.
Oh, how funny. You think there's tumbleweeds in Sydney? You should try coming from a town of 300 people to a global city. Interesting. So how did you, what did it look like friends-wise and sport-wise and those sorts of things, apart from being like the perpetual tour guide? Were you really like getting stuck in as far as local life?
Yeah. So I think because we had visitors so often, it was quite hard to build a life of our own, because we were kind of at the whim of people coming and going. And so it actually took until I got pregnant for me to build a bit of a network of people. And, you know, like you do when you get pregnant, you all of a sudden find this incredible support system of other women who are all going through the same journey that you are, and who I'm still friends with now. Some of them have since moved to Singapore, and I mean, I live in the same building as one. So I think, yeah, it took me until I really needed to get my feet well and truly in the ground to find people. But I'm not really a type that needs a lot of people all the time. So it worked totally fine for me. I'm also not sporty at all. So any country where there was no sport engagement would be fine for me. I went to that ticked that box.
Oh, how funny. I know, because it's been my go-to whenever I've moved to a different place, is always to be like, find a netball club within the first week of being there. And that's how I've found my people in new places.
Yeah, it's a great strategy though. Like it works. And I think, you know, the thing about team sports is you build a deep relationship with people really quickly, because you're kind of all on top of each other all the time. You're seeing each other frequently, and there's a real, you know, structure around it. Whereas meeting people more like organically is much harder and slower, and yeah.
It's so interesting. It's interesting though, when you play a rather Commonwealth country focused sport like netball, if you move to places where you are explaining the sport, you're quite unlikely to find a team that you can join.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think my best strategies around meeting people was to turn up to something that was on. And I remember, you know, my closest friend in Singapore, I went to some kids activity, jiggle wigs, whatever it was. And I sat down next to her, and I kind of just, you know, watched her and vibe with the child and whatever. And then saw her again following week. And then I was just like, yeah, I think she's okay. So I just said, would you like to be friends? And should we start next week? And she said, yeah. And then we did. We kind of started hanging out every Friday, went to, you know, rotated houses. And all of a sudden it was like, you know, she says she's leaving the country and I'm crying. I'm like, no. So I think, you know, when you move countries, particularly in Asia, everybody is so open to, everyone's in the same boat. And so they're open to building relationships and meeting new networks and friends. And Singapore is so transient that even people who have well-established networks, it's constantly moving anyway. And so, yeah, I think the best thing is just to show up and then say, so you seem like we get along.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny, because I've found that you find yourself saying and doing things that you would never do at home. Like, I would never explicitly ask someone to be my friend. I have found that I actually don't ask. I'm like, okay, so we're going to be friends. I love that you gave her a week to think about it as well. We can start next week.
Well, you know, I'm a lot, so she had to take it on.
That's so good. And I think that is actually really great advice, with you watching for a couple of weeks and how they parent, because that can be a maker or breaker of friendships as well.
Oh, really? Because you have to be aligned. Otherwise, it's just going to do your head in. And eventually you want to go on holidays with these people. And so you really need to be, you know, and you can't just like the adults, you have to like the kids as well.
Yeah, it's like full on dating a family rather than just like making an individual friend.
Yep, completely. And you gotta, you know, eventually you gotta suss out the husbands, and it's a real transition point when husbands meet husbands. It really elevates the relationship significantly. You're like, oh, okay, we're gonna take the next step. I mean, even with my design business, I have all these relationships on Instagram, and multiple times people have sent me a message going, could we take it to the next step and maybe use WhatsApp? Yeah, sure, here's my number. And so, you know, I think every time you build relationships, there's always these transitions, and moving to, I think, you know, Singapore is fantastic for that. There's lots of ways to engage with people. You just have to show up.
So in that, well, leading on from that, have you joined sort of industry bodies in either Hong Kong or Singapore, or chambers of commerce, or any of those sorts of things?
No, I'm absolutely terrible. I'm so terrible at it. I am a member of Launchpad, which is a fantastic community of entrepreneurs. And I find that really, that kind of ticks a lot of the boxes, particularly around networking, but also around upskilling, because I mean, the whole community kind of come together to share knowledge. And so that's really, it's really good. But no, I'm far more introverted than most people. And so the idea of going to a ball or a networking event or something kind of makes me go, ooh. Yeah.
So that hasn't been a strategy of growing networks in either places.
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, I've certainly done some work for some of them, but no.
So tell me, have you had any horror stories or biggest challenges in either of the places?
So in between Hong Kong and Singapore, we lived in Boston. And it was a weird little blip because we were there for 6 months, and my husband, by saying yes to the Singapore job, they had then asked him to go and do some kind of get to know the team and the culture and everything in the head office in Boston. And after living in Hong Kong, which is obviously not an English speaking country, for a few years, I moved to America, and on, I don't know, day 3, no, it probably wasn't that, it was probably like a couple of weeks in, my husband comes home and I must have looked deflated. He's like, oh, what's up? And I was like, do you know, I just don't understand. I've literally come from a country where I don't speak the language. Everything is foreign. Like, you couldn't get more different between Hong Kong and Australia, but I feel less understood in America. And so there was just so many conversations where it was just a miss, like translation errors or
also literally like the language. So it wasn't that you were feeling like culture shock or things, it was people couldn't understand you.
They understand me. And they just look at me blankly, and I was like, oh, I don't know where to go with this, because I feel like we're talking the same language, but we're clearly not. I mean, it's little things, like I would say, can I get that takeaway? And they would just stare at me, and I'd be like, okay, I don't know what to do. Like, and then they would just keep looking, and I was like, I don't want to eat here, I want to go. And they're like, you'd like it to go? And I was like, well, that's kind of close enough in the English language, take away and to go to, but they're quite fixed on the languages that they use. And so anything outside of that, it was just a no, cannot. And so, yes, I had lots of horror stories in the US because I was like, oh, it's so lost in translation.
That is hilarious.
Yes. Yeah, which is crazy. Maybe it's just me.
Oh no, I used to live in California, and I used to get told quite regularly that my English was really good, and I was quite confused the first few times, and I was like, oh, you realize that English is my first and only language that I speak.
And you're also speaking English, so when we I don't know what happened there, but it was awkward. In Hong Kong, I mean, it was really easy because you just learn Cantonese for your street name, so you can always get home, and the numbers and how much. You're done.
Yeah. And did you pick up much Cantonese when you were there?
No, my street name. So model. Got ye sons, the numbers, and then how much? I can't even remember how much it is though now. No, not really. I mean, at the time you do. At the time you kind of, because you're hearing it so often, you do start to pick it up. But then you lose it as soon as you're out of the environment because it's not fully ingrained.
That's so interesting. And so you didn't find that as being like a part of a challenge, the language barrier in Hong Kong, or were you just embraced and that's how it was?
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge for me, in all honesty, was that before I moved, I worked in local government, and I led a pretty large team managing arts and cultural and community facilities. And so our role was about how to make communities come together to celebrate around arts and culture, and how to talk about our stories, and how to provide spaces that made people want to engage. And so I loved my work because I got to build some cool buildings. I got to do some awesome renovations and repurposing on heritage buildings. I got to just do really fun stuff. I started an arts program, an arts award, massive festivals. And so that was all really cool. And we kind of made a conscious decision to support my husband's career because I guess he had the greater earning potential, which at the time sounds great. But then you land in there and you're like, well, what am I going to do? And I realized that the work that I'd done, I couldn't really step into that area because you definitely need to know Cantonese. And it was kind of really more a role that was, I didn't have the specialist experience in Hong Kong to go, yeah, I'm an expert in this. So obviously I didn't really know their culture. And so there wasn't a place for me. And I think that happens a lot for people, certainly when I'm talking to clients. And, I had a client in Hong Kong, they had transitioned for his wife's work and like us had made a decision to follow her career because she had the greater earning potential. But he was a policeman in Australia. And so there was no there's no segue from being a policeman in Australia to being a policeman in Hong Kong. That's not a thing. And so then for him, it was like, what does he carve out for himself? Because it's very hard to live without a sense of purpose. And, coupled with that sense of purpose is all these other things of, how do you fill your time and not get bored? How do you just not spend all your time in your kitchen eating all of the food? How do you not just feel like a tour guide to your revolving door of house guests? And so it does force you to kind of take a responsibility for what do you really want, and then how can you make it happen rather than just slot into, somebody else's gig. Easy.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I guess in your line of work, like that sort of corporate scene and working with people to pretty much rejig a resume and look at what transferable skills can be taken from one career. That's a really interesting example of a policeman being able to do. Okay, well, using that for an example without going into the depths of his resume, but what sorts of transferable skills, say using him for an example, but can people sort of have a bit of a think about if like that's where they're sort of at is like, okay, I'm literally sitting down and looking at my resume. What sorts of things have you found have been really interesting when you're moving into like in an expat capacity?
So in his case, he did great. He did really good. We had a long chat about what experience he had, what parts of his role he really enjoyed, what parts he didn't enjoy, and then ended up coming up with a pathway for him to create a private security company, of which he did, and he did really well. And so it does take a level of bravery to step outside because, there's real comfort in getting a salary every month. And so when you step out on your own, you do need to be supported by the family, for a little while until you kind of find your feet and build up your client base, etc. And so there's always options to reinvent or to adapt or to use part of what you have to bring in, skills and to do something else. It's just about having the enthusiasm and initiative to do it, I think, for most people. And, sometimes it's not uncommon for trailing spouses to feel quite low when they move. Like the overall excitement happens and then burns off really quickly. And then they're like, okay, well, now what? And so most of the time it's about getting out of that headspace of like, oh gosh, I just don't really know what to do, into right, what to do. Because they're two very different lives. Yeah,
and they're even just like the inflection in how you say it, like it's a really different headspace to be in. And I think that for a lot of people that have been like visa or physically isolated from a previous career, that you can't sort of see where those skills are, like they transfer over. I think you made a really interesting point earlier, is like talking to others and talking to people around what it looks like, and you actually articulating what it is that you love doing or the aspects of a previous job that you loved doing. And that, yes, that might translate into starting a security company, or it might mean that you go and start your own business, but it might also mean that you do things differently with your time, and it might not be starting a business, and it might be starting a new career or retraining or studying or those sorts of things. But I
think, I mean, one of the advantages of COVID, and there were quite a few, but one of the advantages of COVID was that lots of organizations got to look at how they approach employees differently, and how they work with employees differently. And so one of those is around remote work. And so you might not see an opportunity directly where you are, but there are certainly opportunities if you feel out. And so if you can't find something in Hong Kong specifically, you might be able to find an organization out of Australia who wants on-ground support in Hong Kong occasionally. Or, you know, there's so many different, I mean, I can't remember the number now, I had it the other day, but there are thousands of jobs in the world. It's about being creative about which one you really want and what works for you in your environment.
Yeah, 100%. So tell me, have you got some advice that you give, well, to people that are starting trailing spouse journeys, or things that you wish that you'd known when you sort of first got to Hong Kong?
I think the best advice is, if you're thinking about it, just do it. No better day to start than today, because I kind of, and you know, sometimes there's a reason why you're thinking about stuff. You got to let it percolate. That's fine. That's one thing. But if you're putting it off because you're doubting yourself, or because you're not confident that you'll be able to pull it off, or because you think it's going to be too expensive to set up a business, and then what if you don't succeed? You can acknowledge all of that, all of those thoughts, and then put them to the side and just go, okay, I see all of that doubt, but right now I'm just going to operate in this space, which is potential of let's just try anyway. Because it doesn't matter. Like, let's say you invest all of the money. Let's say you invest $10,000 to set up a company, have a crack, it doesn't work. It's nothing terrible is going to happen.
It's so true.
It's not a greater reflection of who you are, or what your capabilities are, or your value, or it's not anything personal. It just wasn't the right thing in the market. It doesn't mean you can't reinvent, doesn't mean you can't ideate something else. It doesn't mean but whatever you're not doing out of the fear of not doing, you're not getting your needs met. You're not going to be happy. And so my advice is to just start.
That's such great advice. And I think that it doesn't even mean like that it has to be that you start a business or start applying for work, that it might be going and volunteering in a soup kitchen.
Yeah. Well, it might be, you might decide that if everyone starts their trailing spouse journey. Well, I don't know. I reckon at least 95% start their trailing spouse journey with the concept that it's a 2-year thing. I don't know how many people actually just end up having a 2-year thing, but for those 2 years, you can choose to take advantage of the incredible once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and spend 2 years on personal development. You could go and choose to, I don't know, take up weightlifting. You could choose to pursue an MBA. You could choose to completely re-pivot your career through training so that when you go back to your home country, you can start in something new. You could choose to spend that time however you like. You could choose to be a homemaker and do it with full gusto. You could learn every sourdough recipe there is in the planet. You just need to make a choice about how you want to spend your time. No one thing is more worthy or valuable than another. You just need to be happy with what you're doing, because the worst thing for trailing spouses is discontent. Because it spreads and it gets deeper and it gets more heavier, and then everyone in the household feels it, and it lands on the person who is leading, whether that's be the husband or the wife, and then they have the guilt of it, and it just becomes this horrible big thing. And so it might feel like you have less choices, but you actually potentially have more. It's just about how you look at it.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. And I think as well that knowing as well that even if you make a decision to start something, you can always change what that is as well, and it doesn't have to be locked in.
Oh, nothing is permanent. And on average, adults now have 6 careers in their lifetime. And so if you take a blip of 2 years out of yours to go and do something interesting that you're deeply passionate about, good on you. Good on you. claiming that for yourself. So I think, you know, we carry around all this guilt around what we should be doing, how we should be spending our time, what sounds good when people ask us, well, what do you do? Like, just follow. It's an opportunity to follow your passion for however, you know, long that might be. And crazily, the more people follow the passion, the more successful is them. And so, yeah, I think, you know, we all get into a great deal of trouble when we get too stuck in our heads.
I love though that you said that everyone who thinks they're coming for 2 years, that whenever anyone mentions it, people just laugh at you like, oh yeah, that 2-year thing.
Oh, like ridiculous. I don't even know. I legitimately believed that though. I remember saying to people who were like, oh, you're leaving your career. It's like, well, yeah, but people leave for 2 years to go and have babies all the time and they return and it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. Like 10 years later, I was like, oh my gosh, how would I ever get a job going back to Australia now?
Classic. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm going to end on that note. Sam, thank you so much for your time. And your advice, I think, is really fitting. And I hope that that people that are listening to this, like, they can really relate to that and decide what they're going to do today, whether it is for the next week or if it's for the next 2 years or 10.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and to be fair, there are some noble tasks, and taking on the school mum role, if you've got nothing to do that. We all need good ones. It's a struggle.
100%. I have like the biggest respect for all of the parents that run our school WhatsApp groups.
Yeah.
They keep me in line. They keep me sometimes with the kids turning up in outfits or dress ups that they're supposed to if I've been paying attention to the WhatsApp.
Oh, and honestly, I've written those kind of roles into CVs, but like before, and it's what's made them get a job.
100%. If you are looking for transferable skills, I'll tell you what, the logistics, the conflict resolution, the time management, the project management, you can tick those boxes with the management of a WhatsApp group.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time, Sam. I really appreciate it.
No worries, Joe. Thank you.